All right, so get ready, because today we're diving into something a little different. You guys sent us this really interesting piece, a satirical article that compares Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler.
Oh, wow.
It's an excerpt from Top 10 Ways Donald Trump Differs from Adolf Hitler.
Okay.
By Rudolf Okonkwo.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, a Nigerian-American author. He's known for his, sharp wit and satirical takes on politics and current events.
Interesting. Using satire to tackle such a sensitive topic, I mean, it's definitely a unique approach.
Right. It's not your typical political analysis. It's structured as a top 10 list, but it's not about similarities. It's about the supposed differences between Trump and Hitler.
Oh, okay.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and so these comparisons are wild.
Well, that's the nature of satire, right? Exaggeration and irony to make you think.
Exactly. So, for example, he points out that Trump's mother, being Scottish, disqualifies him from belonging to the pure Aryan master race.
So on the surface, it sounds absurd, but it cleverly exposes the ridiculousness of racial purity ideologies. A cornerstone of Hitler's regime.
Yeah.
I feel like he's using humor to sneak in a critique of these dangerous ideologies.
Exactly. Drawing a parallel between a historical figure known for his extremist views and a modern-day leader.
Right.
It makes you examine how those ideologies can manifest in different ways.
Yeah, different forms.
And it's not just about race. He also contrasts Trump's Wharton education and claims of having Einstein's IQ with Hitler's failures as an artist.
Interesting. So he's contrasting a perceived value of a Wharton education with Hitler's background.
Right, which lacked formal academic achievements.
Yeah.
It's what qualities do we actually value in our leaders? Is it formal education?
Business success.
Yeah, business success. Or is it something else entirely?
Yeah. And by contrasting these two figures, he's challenging our assumptions about what makes a strong leader.
Okay.
It's really interesting.
Then there's the comparison between Trump's desire to deport immigrants and Hitler's genocide. Okay, he says that all that Trump is looking for are generals who will lead an army of disgruntled Americans to deport 20 million illegal immigrants for him.
I mean, this comparison is definitely provocative.
Right.
The scale and the intent are obviously very different.
For sure.
But the juxtaposition of Trump's rhetoric on immigration with Hitler's actions, it really forces us to confront the potential dangers of inflammatory rhetoric and scapegoating.
It's like he's saying that even seemingly less extreme actions can have dangerous consequences if they tap into similar prejudices and fears.
Exactly. How easily those in power can exploit existing societal tensions, and manipulate public opinion. Yeah.
He even contrasts their personal lives, pointing out Trump's well-documented history with women compared to Hitler's, I guess, more limited romantic life.
Right.
And it's subtle, but he's highlighting the differences in their public personas and how they've used their personal lives to cultivate a specific image.
Yeah, so even in these lighter comparisons, there's still that commentary on how they present themselves to the public.
It's fascinating how Okonkwo manages to pack so much into these seemingly simple comparisons.
Yeah, the power of satire.
He doesn't shy away from making bold statements either. He even says that it's an insult to Hitler to be compared to Trump.
That's classic satire, right? Taking it to an extreme.
Yeah.
But he's highlighting the absurdity of normalizing Trump's behavior.
It's like turning the tables on those who might dismiss these comparisons as outrageous.
It really is, like using their own logic against them. Yeah.
This raises a really interesting question for me, though. Can humor be an effective tool for social commentary?
That is the question, isn't it?
Can it actually change minds or inspire action?
I mean, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's complex, it's powerful, but it's not a guaranteed solution.
Right.
What it can do is raise awareness, spark conversations,
Get people talking.
and challenge the status quo.
So it's not necessarily about providing answers, but about getting people to ask the right questions.
Exactly. And sometimes that's the most important step in creating change.
And it's also worth considering Okonkwo's background as a Nigerian-American writer. How does his perspective inform his view of American politics?
I mean, coming from a country with its own history of colonialism and political turmoil,
Right.
it allows him to offer a fresh perspective.
Right. One that those who've always lived within the American political system might not see.
Right.
It's like he's able to see patterns and parallels that others might miss.
Exactly. And that's what makes his satirical take on this comparison so compelling. He's challenging us to really think about what we're willing to accept from our leaders.
Okonkwo's top 10 list has even more interesting comparisons.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in one point he states that Hitler promoted ethnic and Christian nationalism, but Trump is just an amiable, Bible-carrying, church-going Christian who sees good people on both sides.
Okay, so this comparison highlights the contrast between their approaches to ideology and public image.
Right.
Hitler was very open about his beliefs,
Yeah.
while Trump often presented himself as more moderate.
Even as his actions maybe suggested otherwise.
Exactly. And it reminds us that we need to look beyond just the surface,
Right. Yeah.
and critically examine the actions and policies of our leaders, regardless of how they present themselves.
Regardless of their public persona,
Yes.
he also doesn't shy away from comparing their military service.
Oh.
Or lack thereof.
Right.
He mentions Hitler volunteering for the German army during World War I, while Trump received multiple deferments for the Vietnam War,
Okay.
including one for bone spurs.
Interesting. So it's a contrast in their attitudes towards service and sacrifice.
Right, and it taps into that broader conversation about the expectations we have for our leaders, particularly regarding their willingness to serve their country in times of conflict.
Makes you think about how those experiences, or lack thereof, might shape their worldview and their decision-making.
Right.
It's fascinating.
And then there's the parallel he draws between Hitler's beer hall push and Trump's January 6th insurrection, noting that both were attempts to seize power, but with very different outcomes.
Yeah, this comparison is particularly relevant. It makes us examine, the fragility of democratic institutions.
Right.
And the consequences of unchecked ambition and political polarization.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history can repeat itself in unexpected ways.
Definitely.
Speaking of consequences, Okonkwo even contrasts their approaches to failure.
Oh, how so?
He mentions that Hitler blamed the German people for not utilizing his genius when his regime collapsed,
Right.
while Trump kind of takes credit for his successes and blames others for his failures.
This is really telling about their personalities and leadership styles.
Right.
It highlights their tendencies towards accountability.
Yeah.
And their willingness to accept blame.
Or not.
Or
Right.
not, exactly.
It also makes you think about, the psychological profiles of these leaders.
Yeah.
And how that might have influenced their actions and decisions while in power.
Definitely. Their relationships with their generals are also put under the microscope.
Oh, yeah.
He highlights that Hitler's generals eventually wanted to kill him when it became clear he was leading Germany to destruction, while Trump's generals spent their time trying to prevent him from violating the Constitution.
Oh, wow.
Different levels of concern from within their own administrations.
It makes you wonder about the role of advisors and those in positions of authority around these leaders. Did they enable the behavior or were they trying to stop it?
Yeah, the complexities of power dynamics, really.
Right.
And the ethical dilemmas.
And finally, he compares their explanations for economic hardship and cultural change.
Okay.
He points out that Hitler blamed the Jews and communists, while Trump blames immigrants and enemies within. So while the targets are different, Okonkwo suggests that both leaders use scapegoating to simplify complex problems.
Right, and appeal to their base.
It highlights a disturbing pattern in how some leaders manipulate fear and prejudice.
Yeah, to consolidate their power.
Creating a sense of us versus them.
Which can be very dangerous, leading to the erosion of social cohesion and the rise of extremism.
We've reached the end of Okonkwo's top 10 list, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface of this satirical analysis.
Yeah, there's a lot more to unpack here.
There is, in terms of the deeper meaning and the effectiveness of his approach.
Definitely.
So let's take a moment to process all this before we dive back in.
Okay.
Back into the nuances of Okonkwo's satire and what it tells us about the state of political discourse today.
Sounds good.
In part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay. Okonkwo's piece, it really shows how satire can be a powerful tool for social commentary.
Yeah.
It allows you to address those sensitive topics with a blend of humor and insight.
Right. And you can reach an audience that might otherwise just not be interested.
Exactly. Like using humor as a Trojan horse to deliver serious social critique.
Get people laughing and then, bam, hit them with these really complex issues.
Exactly. Good satire isn't just about making people laugh, though.
Right.
It's about making them think, making them question.
And feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, sometimes a little uncomfortable.
Okonkwo definitely achieves that with his Trump-Hitler comparisons.
Oh, yeah.
It's so provocative, you can't help but see the parallels.
Even if they're exaggerated.
Even if they're presented in an absurd way.
Right. And that's where the brilliance is. He's not saying they're the same.
Right.
But he's using that comparison to highlight tendencies, patterns of behavior, and the dangers of unchecked power in any leader.
It's like holding up a distorted mirror.
To society.
You see this warped image.
Yeah. But it makes you look at things from a new perspective.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Satire does often highlight the absurdity of situations and makes us question what we consider normal.
What's acceptable?
So let's talk about the effectiveness of satire. I mean,
okay.
Does it actually work? Can humor really change minds?
Well,
Or inspire action?
that's the age-old question.
Right.
Satire, it has potential, but it also has limitations.
Right.
It can raise awareness, spark conversations, and challenge the status quo, but it's not a magic bullet.
People aren't going to watch a satirical sketch and suddenly have a complete political awakening.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
But what satire can do is plant seeds of doubt.
Mm.
It can encourage critical thinking
Okay.
and make people more receptive to alternative perspectives.
So it's more about opening minds.
Yes.
Starting conversations.
Yes.
And sometimes laughing is the only way to deal with these situations.
Especially in politics.
Especially in politics.
You need that coping mechanism to deal with some of those difficult realities.
There are some potential pitfalls to using satire, though, right?
Oh, for sure.
It seems like a balancing act.
It is.
You have to be careful.
One of the biggest challenges is walking that fine line between humor and offense.
Right, because you push boundaries, but you have to do it in a way that isn't alienating.
Doesn't dehumanize.
Yeah, and if you go too far, you risk losing your audience.
Completely.
And they just dismiss it as mean-spirited or disrespectful.
Exactly. You want to challenge assumptions and provoke thought, but not resort to personal attacks.
Or harmful stereotypes.
Yeah.
And there's also the danger of trivializing serious issues.
Oh, absolutely.
If satire isn't done carefully, it can undermine the importance of the message.
You have to be mindful of the context and the potential impact.
Yeah.
The goal is to use humor to illuminate the issue.
Right, not diminish it,
Not at all.
not make light of it.
It's like there's a time and a place for everything.
Right, and satire can be effective
When done well.
when done well, but you have to be sensitive to the topic and how the audience might react.
And it's subjective, too.
Oh, yeah.
What one person finds funny,
Right.
another person might find offensive.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. It's challenging.
How do you think Okonkwo navigates these challenges?
I think he does a pretty good job. He states his satirical intent from the beginning,
Okay.
sets the stage for the outlandish comparisons.
Right, and the humor is sharp but not mean-spirited.
He's not trying to just get cheap laughs, you know.
Right.
He's trying to make you think about complex and sensitive topics.
And his background as a Nigerian-American writer, I mean,
Right.
that adds another layer of complexity to his perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he's looking at American politics
Through a unique lens
shaped by his own experience.
with colonialism, political turmoil, and the immigrant experience.
So he's an outsider looking in,
Exactly.
which allows him to see things differently.
Maybe things that those immersed in the system miss.
It's interesting to think how his piece might be received by different audiences, too.
Oh, totally.
Like, Americans might have a different reaction than people from other countries.
Right. Different understanding of history and politics.
So what do you think, listeners?
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
How effective do you find Okonkwo's use of satire?
Does it make you think differently?
About the comparisons he's making?
Change your perspective on humor in political discourse,
These are important questions to think about.
especially today.
Especially today, with social media and partisan echo chambers.
Satire can cut through the noise,
Yeah.
challenge us to think critically.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of serious issues, there's still room for humor.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all.
Laughter can be the best medicine,
It can.
but it's also a reminder of the responsibility that comes with using humor.
When addressing these sensitive topics.
Right, it's delicate.
And Okonkwo's piece is thought-provoking,
It is.
showing how satire can be used to start those conversations
Challenge assumptions.
and maybe even inspire change.
It feels like Okonkwo is challenging us to be more discerning.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
It's easy to get caught up in the outrage,
Yeah.
but we need to step back and think, is this a valid comparison?
Right, like, are we just resorting to labels and generalizations?
Exactly.
It's like a test of our critical thinking skills.
It is. Can we see through the shock value and look at the deeper issues?
And he makes me think about humor.
Okay.
It's not always easy to find,
Especially in these political debates.
but maybe we should try.
I think there's power in being able to laugh at ourselves
Yeah.
and the absurdity of it all.
Yeah.
It can help us keep things in perspective,
Not get bogged down.
right? Like a pressure valve release.
Help us process those difficult emotions.
Connect with people.
Even with those who have different views.
And it can disarm opponents, make them less likely to see us as the enemy.
Right.
When you can laugh together, it creates a space for dialogue.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Okonkwo's work, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the first step is being aware of our own biases.
Right. We all have them.
We need to be open to challenging them.
Consider those different viewpoints.
And be critical consumers of information.
Especially with social media.
So much content.
We have to be able to tell the difference between credible sources and misinformation.
And engage in respectful dialogue.
Even with those we disagree with.
We can learn from each other.
Try to understand where they're coming from.
It's not about always agreeing, but finding common ground.
And I think Okonkwo's piece shows us that humor can be a valuable tool.
It can.
It helps break down barriers.
Love those connections.
And approach these tough topics with an open mind.
Exactly.
So, listeners, as you engage in those political conversations,
remember what we talked about today.
Question those assumptions.
Challenge the hyperbole.
Engage in thoughtful dialogue.
Even when it's hard.
And remember that humor, when used responsibly,
Be powerful.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Rudolf Okonkwo's work.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Keep those minds curious and keep those conversations going.